Iran's foreign minister stood before cameras and announced in official diplomatic language that the Strait of Hormuz was open. He was not lying. He was simply not in charge. Within hours of that statement, not days, not after some new provocation, not following a breakdown in talks, IRGC gunboats opened fire on 3 merchant vessels in the same strait the foreign minister had just declared safe. They boarded 2 of them. They seized the crews. And state television, the regime's own media apparatus, called the foreign minister stupid by name on air while he was conducting official negotiations on behalf of the government that owns that television channel. This did not happen in a war between 2 countries. It happened inside one. And here is what that single sequence of events tells you about Iran that 4 decades of intelligence reporting, diplomatic engagement, and military analysis have consistently underestimated. The Islamic Republic does not have a government. It has 2 governments. They share a flag, a geography, and a propaganda machine. They do not share a chain of command. And right now, in the 21-mile corridor where 20% of the world's seaborne oil passes through daily, those 2 governments are making opposite decisions simultaneously. And neither one can stop the other. Stay with me. Because what is fracturing inside Iran at this moment is not a political dispute. It is not a negotiating posture. It is the visible, operational collapse of a dual authority system that was always one crisis away from breaking. And Hormuz just became that crisis. Welcome back to Suraski. If you want clear breakdowns of how military power actually works, not headlines, not propaganda, but the real mechanics behind modern conflict, subscribe now. Let's get into it. On April 17th, Foreign Minister IRGC announced publicly that the Strait of Hormuz was open to all commercial vessels. The IRGC closed it the same day. Iranian gunboats fired on a tanker. An unidentified projectile struck a container ship, damaging cargo. India summoned Iran's ambassador over attacks on 2 India-flagged vessels. 20% of the world's daily seaborne oil supply moves through a strait that is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. On April 17th, the institution that controls that strait and the institution that governs the country it belongs to gave 2 completely opposite orders. And the institution with the guns won. 5 days later, it happened again. On April 22nd, IRGC forces fired on 3 vessels and seized 2 of them, the MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas. A Revolutionary Guard gunboat opened fire on a container ship off the Omani coast. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Center documented heavy damage to the bridge. These attacks came 1 day after President Trump extended the ceasefire with Iran indefinitely. Read that sequence one more time. Trump extends the ceasefire. Iran fires on 3 ships. Iran seizes 2. The IRGC posts a statement saying the vessels had endangered maritime security by operating without the necessary permits. The foreign minister says the strait is open. The military says it requires permits. The foreign minister does not issue permits for strait transit. The IRGC does. That is not a bureaucratic overlap. That is a parallel authority structure operating on top of an official government and making the official government's decisions irrelevant in real time. Here is what every major outlet is telling you right now. Iran is using ship attacks as calculated leverage. The seizures are strategic pressure, a way to force Washington to soften the blockade while keeping the diplomatic process technically alive. Someone in Tehran is running this. Someone decided. Someone is in control. That explanation is clean. It is logical. It fits the way states normally behave under coercion. It is almost certainly wrong. And here is how you can tell. When a government uses military action as coordinated negotiating leverage, the civilian and the military wings say the same thing in public. The foreign minister does not announce the strait is open while the military closes it. State media does not call the foreign minister stupid on air while he is in the middle of nuclear talks. That is not strategic ambiguity. That is institutional incoherence. The Institute for the Study of War documented what is actually happening on April 18th with a precision that the leverage explanation cannot accommodate. The IRGC, they concluded, appears to have intervened and reasserted Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz after IRGC announced on April 17th that the strait was fully open. And then this line, the one that changes the entire frame of what Washington is dealing with. Iran's negotiating team reportedly did not have full authority to finalize a deal with the United States in Islamabad. Stop on that. Iran sent a delegation to nuclear negotiations. That delegation cannot say yes. The people sitting across the table from American diplomats are not authorized by the institution that actually controls the levers of military power in Iran to commit to anything. The United States has been negotiating with a committee that cannot deliver on its own commitments. That is not a negotiating tactic. That is a broken command structure presenting itself as a government. Here's the counterintuitive truth that most analysis misses. The most dangerous moment in this crisis is not when Iran refuses to negotiate. It is when Iran's negotiators agree to something, and the IRGC ignores it, because that moment has already happened. Twice, in the same strait, in the same week. The IRGC fired on ships while the foreign minister said they were safe. This is not a malfunction. This is the system working exactly as it was designed, for a different era, under a different authority, with a supreme leader capable of imposing resolution when the two parallel systems collided. That authority no longer functions. And what you are watching in the Strait of Hormuz is what happens when the gravitational center that held two competing governments inside one country finally goes dark. Iran does not have one government. It has two parallel systems of authority that have been in quiet competition for control since 1979. The first system is the civilian government. President Pezeshkian, Foreign Minister IRGC, Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf. These are the figures who appear at international forums, who sign ceasefire agreements, who announce that straits are open. The second system is the IRGC. It does not merely command a military force. According to multiple independent assessments, it controls an estimated 30 to 40% of Iran's domestic economy. Construction firms, telecommunications networks, oil contracts, port operations, banking facilities. It has its own media empire, its own intelligence apparatus. It reports not to the president, but directly to the supreme leader. For 45 years, this dual structure was held together by one mechanism, the supreme leader's office as the final arbiter. When the two systems gave contradictory orders, there was a hierarchy capable of resolving the contradiction before it became operationally visible. That mechanism is now broken. The vacancy at the top of the hierarchy has not been filled in any functional sense. And the institution that has decided to act without waiting for authorization, the IRGC, is the one with the ships, the gunboats, and the authority to board vessels in international waters. The IRGC is not defying civilian authority. It is filling a vacuum. It is acting as if it is the government, because in the absence of a functional supreme leader, no institution has the authority to tell it otherwise. Ask yourself this: when was the last time a country's foreign minister was publicly called stupid by his own military state media while conducting official nuclear negotiations on his government's behalf? Not in a leak, not in a private cable, on television, by name, because he announced that a strait was open. That has one answer: never. Until now. The ship seizures keep happening. The tanker attacks keep happening. Every single one directly undermines Iran's negotiating position, antagonizes China and India, whose vessels are being targeted, and accelerates the economic pressure that is already compressing the regime's survival timeline. So why does the IRGC keep doing it? The answer is institutional, not ideological. And it is more important than anything happening at the surface of the strait. The IRGC's entire architecture, its budget, its political power, its control over roughly a third of the Iranian economy, depends on a single structural condition: the existence of an active external threat and Iran's permanent conflict posture. In a wartime framework, the IRGC is indispensable. Its budget is unchallengeable. Its economic empire is justified by the national emergency that requires its operational presence across every sector of strategic infrastructure. In a peacetime framework, every element of that changes. The IRGC's budget becomes a question that an exhausted population, standing in fuel lines in one of the world's largest oil-producing countries, has legitimate democratic standing to ask. Its control over banking becomes an accountability issue. Its management of port operations becomes a subject of parliamentary scrutiny. Peace is not a policy option the IRGC disagrees with. It is an existential threat to the institutional architecture that the Revolutionary Guards have constructed over 4.5 decades. Every ceasefire the foreign minister negotiates is a direct attack on the IRGC's reason for existing. Every ship that transits Hormuz safely under diplomatic agreement is a proof of concept that the IRGC is not needed, and the IRGC's response to that proof of concept is to put a gunboat on the ship's bow. Here's what makes this structurally different from every previous Iranian crisis. In 2009, in 2019, in every confrontation before this one, the IRGC was firing at external enemies. It was executing the regime's strategy against an outside threat. What is happening now is different in kind, not just degree. The IRGC is firing at the regime's own diplomatic strategy. It is not protecting the Islamic Republic. It is consuming it, because the alternative, from the IRGC's institutional perspective, is worse. The cost of this institutional logic is being paid in precisely the places Iran can least afford to lose ground. India summoned Iran's ambassador after its flagged vessels were attacked. India is not a declared adversary. It is one of the few large economies that had maintained commercial relationships with Tehran despite Western sanctions. When the IRGC fires on Indian ships, it is not striking an enemy. It is eliminating a partner that sanctions pressure had not eliminated. China's position has shifted in ways that would have been structurally unimaginable 6 months ago. Beijing purchased 90% of Iran's oil exports before the blockade began. China's 25-year strategic partnership with Tehran promised hundreds of billions in investment. And yet China's foreign ministry has now explicitly prioritized Hormuz remaining safe and open as an international waterway. Xi Jinping's call went to Saudi Arabia, not Iran. The signal embedded in that choice of interlocutor is surgical. China's priority is the corridor, not the Islamic Republic. And Chinese ships are being fired on by the same IRGC forces that Beijing's strategic partnership was built to align with. Russia's posture is equally cold beneath the surface solidarity. Foreign Minister Lavrov condemned the U.S. blockade as unlawful and defended Iran's rights, and then, in the same forum, advertised Russia's readiness to supply energy resources to China and other countries affected by the crisis. Russia is marketing its capacity to replace Iranian oil in Chinese markets while performing solidarity with the country whose market share it is preparing to capture. Every barrel Iran cannot export because of IRGC shipping disruptions is a barrel Russia can sell at prices Iran can no longer compete for. Iran is the world's third largest proven oil reserve holder. Right now, Iranian citizens are waiting in fuel lines because the country cannot refine enough of its own crude to meet domestic consumption, and the refined fuel imports that bridge that gap can no longer enter through Hormuz. The IRGC's war doctrine has produced a situation where the world's third largest oil reserve is generating fuel shortages for the population that lives on top of it. Here's the strategic problem that no intelligence assessment has cleanly resolved. When the United States sits across from Iran's negotiating team, who is it actually negotiating with? The ISW's assessment is direct. The team in Islamabad does not have full authority to finalize a deal. The IRGC has functionally sidelined the pragmatic faction. The negotiators cannot deliver yes independently. Whatever framework they agree to can be contradicted, in real time with live fire, by an institution that considers itself unbound by what the diplomatic faction agreed to. This is the strategic paradox at the center of the Hormuz crisis that no headline has adequately captured. Iran cannot close the strait completely. The economic consequences would be terminal within weeks. Iran cannot open it diplomatically. The IRGC contradicts every opening with gunfire. Iran cannot fight through it. American naval dominance in the corridor is not contested. Iran cannot negotiate out of it. The negotiators do not control the gunboats. Every exit Iran has from this situation requires a decision that one of Iran's two governments will immediately reverse. Most analysis frames this as a standoff between Iran and the United States. That framing is incomplete. What is actually happening is a three-way collision. Washington versus Tehran's civilian government, Tehran's civilian government versus the IRGC, and the IRGC versus the economic reality that its own war doctrine has created. The United States is not the most dangerous actor in this equation right now. The IRGC is, because it is the only faction whose institutional survival depends on the situation getting worse. The tanker attacks are not the story. They are the symptom. The story is what those attacks prove about the architecture of Iranian power, and why that proof cannot be undone. For 45 years, the Islamic Republic presented itself as a unified system with a coherent strategic vision managed by an ideological hierarchy. The supreme leader's authority was the gravitational center that held the parallel governments inside one country. The civilian apparatus administered. The IRGC protected. Final authority resided at the top. That picture is no longer operationally accurate. And the moment it ceased to be accurate, the moment the IRGC opened fire on ships the foreign minister had just cleared for transit, that inaccuracy became visible to every government, every shipping company, every intelligence agency, and every cargo captain in the world simultaneously. You cannot unring that bell. India knows its ships are not safe in a corridor that Iran's own foreign minister declared safe. China knows its tankers can be fired on by the IRGC regardless of what Beijing's strategic partnership with Tehran was supposed to guarantee. Every shipping insurer, every route planner, Every cargo owner now has to price in not just Iran versus the United States, but Iran versus itself. A regime whose military apparatus has effectively seized autonomous control of its most strategically critical geography, while the civilian government publicly contradicts it in real time, is not a regime that is under pressure. It is a regime that is separating. And a separating regime with active military forces in a critical waterway does not de-escalate through negotiation alone. It de-escalates when one of its two governments wins the internal argument, or when external pressure makes the cost of continuing that argument higher than the cost of ending it. Neither of those conditions currently exists. The foreign minister says the strait is open. The IRGC decides who survives trying to use it. Washington is not waiting for Iran to negotiate. It is waiting for Iran to decide, internally, finally, irreversibly, which government actually runs the country. And the clock on that decision is the same clock that is filling Iran's oil storage tanks toward the geological threshold beyond which some wells will never fully recover. The diplomats are afraid. The generals are firing. The supreme leader cannot provide the authorization the system requires, and the ships keep coming, because 20% of the world's seaborne oil cannot wait for Tehran to resolve a constitutional crisis that Tehran does not publicly acknowledge it is having. The strait is 21 miles wide. The fracture inside Iran is wider, and no one, not in Washington, not in Beijing, not in the corridors of the foreign ministry where IRGC is still trying to negotiate a deal his own military will not honor, knows which one closes first.